Doctors of Reddit, what are the most memorable last words you've ever heard from a patient? Not his last words, but his last dad joke. My father's doctor, I'm afraid you'll die soon. My father, oh I can live with that. Not a doctor, but a paramedic who has heard too many last words. And these are rarely what you see in movies, where the patient says something then peacefully and quickly dies. Lots of mine have been just before going into cardiac or respiratory arrest, or just deteriorating in general. It's long-winded and painful to watch. This really freaking hurts. A 22-year-old kid who flew off his motorbike after being hit by a lorry. He went into shock afterwards and we couldn't get him back. This was back when I was a student, and even though it's quite a humorous last sentence, it still kinda haunts me. I'm glad my wife didn't have to find my body, an elderly gent who suffered global 3rd 4th degree burns. He had fallen asleep while making him and his wife lunch. Massive fire ensured. This one still hurts to think about. Something I find really interesting is the sort of phenomenon of impending doom. The amount of patients I've had with myocardial infarction, heart attack, AAA ruptures etc. whose last words, or at least one of their last sentences, have been I think I'm going to die. When you see a patient who basically looks like crap, sweaty and pale, and they tell you they think they are going to die, you listen, because they probably are. My grandmother's last words, spoken as a nurse was checking on her and accidentally woke her up, was, "Good God, you scared the crap out of me." She went back to sleep and never woke up. Passed about a week later. I'm sorry for your loss and feel bad for laughing, but man, this is hilarious. The last words I ever heard my dad speak were on the phone, Thanksgiving night. As we were about to hang up, he stopped me and took a really long pause before telling me he loved me. He started crying as he was saying it, apologizing for not being able to be with me on Thanksgiving. He lived far away, and he told me to hug my mother for him. The next morning he died of a heart attack in his sleep. Sometimes I wonder if he knew he was going to die somehow. Thanks, Reddit. You made me cry again. Agaranka, a famous sidekick symptom of cardiac type chest pain. My attending explained it as the feeling of impending doom, that you might die, because you just might. I'm not a doctor, but a nurse, and I've worked with the elderly for quite some time now. Most have been silent in their last moments. One old man sighed out finally and went on. He just looked so relieved to finally die. One lady with severe dementia kinda had no idea what was going on. She was pretty out of it, and her last words were that she missed her mommy and that she hoped mom would bake bread, cause she was hungry. Another lady was absolutely terrified and I tried my best to calm her down. It's heartbreaking. You can't really do anything with their fear other than calm them as best as you can. The lady asked me, will everything be okay? And I told her that, yeah, everything would be fine. The kids were fine. And everything was fine. And her flowers were watered. She didn't say anything after that and passed on an hour later. I'm not a doctor, but I am a nurse. I've heard a few final words. One that sticks out to me was a young man, 20s, who was in a pretty bad car accident. He had lost a leg and as a result lost so much blood. The last thing he said was pretty much asking his girlfriend if his dog was alright. The dog had been in the car and according to his dad didn't make it. I cried in my car for a while after that shift. He was so worried about his dog he had no idea how close to death he was. Nurse here. I have worked in hospice for a while. One of my patients' last words were, "Oh mama, I have missed you." Yes, I cried. Instinctively read this in Johnny Bravo's voice. Did not cry. Trying to patch up a young guy to be medivaced, his body was torn to crap. He was fighting hard to keep going. He was gasping and asking me to teach him how to pray. Hearing that changed me as a person. I've been a lot colder since that. I'm a nurse. It was just after breakfast. My patient was a little old lady who had been on the ward for ages but could never remember my name and always called me Matt. She had a cardiac arrest in front of me. We started CPR and defied her, and in the only time I have ever seen this happen in a cardiac arrest, she immediately regained consciousness. She looked directly at me and addressed me by my actual name and said, "Alex." I think it was a Vegemite toast. She then promptly vomited and lost consciousness again, and we could not get her back. It is to date one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me. To be fair, it was a Vegemite. Nurse here. I'll never forget her. I'd been in nursing for around 6 months. It was near the beginning of my shift. I'd just finished introducing myself to my new group of patients. One of my patients called me and said, "Get my daughter out of the room. It is time for me to die." I was very confused by this at first. I had just gotten out of her room not long ago and met the patient and her daughter, and we got to joke around a bit, and she'd just gotten up and walked. The report I'd gotten on her gave no real indication that she was unstable. I went to go see her. The daughter was just walking out of the room and I asked what was going on. The daughter was like, "She's telling me to leave and saying it's time for her to die. She's not used to being in a hospital, so I'm sure she's just being hysterical." I told the daughter I would go check on her. She did not respond to me and had no pulse, and we could not bring her back. It was so sudden for everyone. The family and staff and I were not expecting this. From the small amount of time I'd met her, this woman was a real joy, and it was obvious that she was loved and respected by all who knew her. Us nurses and the family all had a cry together. I think about her last words and wonder how long she knew. She did not sound fearful, just said it with a voice that said that she knew it was time. Obligatory, not a doctor, but I am an STNA. My grandma, who was pretty much my mother, was diagnosed with 6 types of cancer. I was one of her main caregivers. Towards the end, when things were snowballing out of control, we made peace and told her that she could go whenever she wanted. She told me that she was holding on to meet her only great-grandchild. I was 20 weeks pregnant at the time. FFWD to the 15th of April of this year, I visited her in the hospital to both hang out and explain medical jargon to her. With my 5-month-old daughter, Grandma was just hurting really bad and was going to get papers filed to have a nurse visit at home 2x a day. Everything seemed completely fine for having cancer. I mean, other than her arm hurting so badly that she couldn't move it. She was asleep when we first came in the room, and as I was writing my "just stopped by to visit, we love you" note for her to find, she woke up. We had an amazing chat like nothing was wrong. Just her complaining about my grandpa leaving her hospital TV on this History Channel when he left and the food sucking. Right before we left, she gave my daughter's hand a squeeze and said, "I am so glad I got to see you one last time. Make sure Grandpa takes you to the park for me. Grandma loves you both so much." Those were the last words she ever said. She passed away in hospice care 4 days later. My grandpa and I never expected her to pass away so quickly. We knew she was hurting, but she hid it so well. I am so glad she woke up when we visited. She got to see her great-granddaughter one last time. Sorry for the ramble. While writing this, I started bawling my eyes out. I think this post just made it click for me that she is gone. Hug your loved ones tight. You never know if it will be the last time you see them. My dad was ill with a stomach bug. After just having an operation, I was staying with my parents for one night and he got up to get a drink of water and fell down the stairs. I picked him up and he was woozy. He wouldn't let me call an ambulance. 20 minutes later he got up to go to the toilet and collapsed. I ran to his aid and asked, "Are you okay? Are you in pain?" His last words were, "No pain. I'm fine. No pain." And the warmth of his body went cold in my hands in about 30 seconds. I feel privileged to have been there. It is a privilege. I was with my mom as she breathed her last, and it remains one of the most beautiful, though sad, moments of my life. She was with me when I came into the world, and I held her hand as she left it. Neither doctor or nurse. My grandma told me to go check the mail because my grandpa wasn't feeling well. I did and went and checked on him. He was in bed in the middle of the afternoon, which was a bad omen. I jokingly said, "What the heck are you taking a nap for now?" He just made a painful smile. I told him he better get to feeling better and his reply was, "Don't worry, I'll live." He fell out and unconscious later that day and died the next. I'm sorry that my reply wasn't necessarily for the question asked, but I love that he told a joke to me as his last words because he knew he wasn't going to make it. Nurse here. One that's always stuck with me. Had a patient I was helping another nurse care for. Patient had messed themselves and so we had gone into the room to clean them up. Patient halfway joked and talked with us afterward, was doing alright, and had no complaints, so we left the room. Not an hour later, responding to a call light down the hall, the patient's room is on, and as we pass the room, we hear, "Help, Help me, I'm dying. By the time we hit the door, the patient was stone cold gone. No pulse, no breathing. On the positive, the patient was a DNR, so there was nothing else to do. But the look of shock and terror on the patient's face post-mortem was still kind of horrifying. That's terrifying. I hope that doesn't happen often. My daughter. A nurse said the ones who are ready to go are the easiest. She holds their hands and lets them know they aren't alone. The hardest ones are the fighters. One man, in his 70s, kept saying no, nope, I'm not ready to go, I'm not ready to go, I'm not ready to go. When he died later that day, she cried. And one of the nurses said, maybe you should rethink a career if you are going to cry. The head nurse told her, no honey, if there ever comes a time you don't cry, well that's when you need to stop being a nurse. As a paramedic, the day I stop caring about my patients is the day I quit. Not last words per se, but said while my grandmother was in palliative care for cancer, the nurses hand out pictures of a human body, front and back, and ask the patients to circle where it hurts. She circled the buttocks and wrote pain in the butt. She was an amazing woman. Not a doctor, but lost my mother to cancer 3 years ago. Entire family, 4 children and my dad around the bed. My dad and her decided that we should stop the drugs and let her pass as she was in too much pain. There was no last words, but right before she passed, after we took her off the drugs, she opened her eyes and saw her whole family around her bed, with all the love in the world. Before she passed away, I know it's not a statement, but knowing she got to see her family with her as her last sight lets me sleep better at night. Miss you mom, and will love you forever. 3. My mama died 18 months ago, at my home and in my arms. I don't know how or where she was, but I talked in her ear until she stopped breathing. I like to think she heard me saying I love you. Nurse here. We had a chronic patient, a kid, about 6. He was in and out of the hospital for either chemotherapy or series of blood transfusions. He had AML. Over time I had become close to the patient and his family, and I got to say, I admire the strength of his parents. They were not well off, and we all knew that sooner or later the kid was gonna die, but they pushed through with his treatment. After 3 years, the kid's body couldn't take it any longer. Everyone was in tears, crap, even I was. As he lay in the hospital bed, in between his gasps, he asked his mother, "Ma, will I be seeing Jesus now?" Holding back her sobs, his mother calmly said, "Yes, my little boy." Kid went to sleep, never woke up. I went to the bathroom and cried like a girl. I never got to give the kid the Tom and Jerry DVDs that I promised to give him. Veterinarian here. Different approach to the question. When I was a student, this big tattooed bloke comes in, one word answer kind of guy. He comes in with his Jack Russell, who was elderly and had been treated for a range of problems for a while. Dog was coming in to be put to sleep. Just as the vet was administering the drugs, the man goes, "Remember playing ball?" Dog looked him straight in the face, eyes shining and doggy smiling. Dog slipped away with that happy expression. This big guy then cries and cries, absolutely distraught, hand against the wall, bawling his eyes out. Those final words hit me and the vet hard. A few tears were shed, to say the least. My nanny lived in a long-term care home for the last bit of her life. Her roommate was always singing and, God bless her soul, she was awful. So, my nanny was sleeping and Rose was singing her tune when all of a sudden my nanny woke up and shouted, "Rose, be quiet. Can't you see I'm trying to die?" She passed 2 days later without saying much more. It made everyone feel better about her death. She was a supremely funny lady. Not a doctor, but I lost my brother a few years ago. His final words broke my heart and are the reason I'm finishing my school. They were, "I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise, and I'm sorry I couldn't make you all proud. Sorry for your loss, man. Hope school's going well." I was brought up by my grandparents from the age of 2 weeks. My grandfather was like a dad to me. Growing up, he was like the oracle. I used to think he knew the answer to every question, and to this day I wish he was still here to help me when I'm down. He had a way of making you see the light in even the worst times. Ironically, the very worst time in my life was when he was diagnosed with lung cancer and then passed away. He wouldn't let me come to the hospital with him on his appointments. I was 18/19 at this time, as he didn't want it to affect me, so my father used to go with him. One day I insisted on going. The one and only day I go with him is the day they tell us that his cancer had spread to his spine and that there was nothing they could do. I used to live with my girlfriend at the time in a flat directly opposite my nan and granddad's place, and 3 days after that appointment my nan called asking me to help granddad into bed as he couldn't get up by himself. I walked him into the bedroom with my arms under his and tucked him in. He looked at me from the bed and said, "Sorry son, you shouldn't be doing this. I just feel so strange today. I've never felt like this before." I kissed his forehead and told him not to be sorry, that I loved him and that I would see him in the morning. I went home and cried myself to sleep that night. I woke up to a call from my nan in tears at 5:30 am saying that she couldn't wake him up. Me and my girlfriend ran across the road in our pajamas and into their flat. My nan collapsed onto my girlfriend and chucked a phone at me. She was on a call with emergency services. I slowly walked into the bedroom dreading what would be through the door. I walked in and he was laying there, eyes open, and I knew instantly that he was gone. I opened my mouth to try and speak to the man trying to help me on the phone, but nothing came out. The hollow and empty look in the eyes of a once very loving, funny and selfless man I used to call granddad still haunts me to this day. I will never forget. The reason I posted the seemingly irrelevant post is because my grandfather's last words were that he felt strange, and I didn't put much thought into it as the man had cancer. But I think he knew it was his last night. If I had one wish for anything I wanted in this world, it would be to rewind time and to not have missed the signs my granddad was showing. How I wish I had clocked on that night and got to spend some more time with him. Sorry for the long boring post. This all happened in 2012, so a while ago now, but for some reason I felt like getting this off of my chest. So thanks if you read this far. 3. Your good grandson. My sister's a nurse and she's heard a lot of last words which she tells me about. The few at the top of my head right now are Claire, Patchy, I missed you, his wife, and doggo best friend respectively. Help me. Crazy. I understand it's a huge world, but I have a buddy whose grandpa passed. His grandma's name was Claire and his dog's name was Patchy. R.I.P. Shane's grandpa. Old man was a beast with his Xbox 360. Hospice doctor here. Still, the best thing I heard has been, if I knew this was going to be the end of my life, I wouldn't have been so nice. I know that sounds bad, but truly, it was an acknowledgement of how we treat our elderly. We don't listen to their wishes. We just do what medicine does. We don't have real conversations. We don't talk about what life for people is like, and then we exclude them from the conversation. I have a hard job, but I love it. You learn how much of your daily BS is not meaningful and not worth worrying about. She just wanted to die, and not fit selfish reasons. The only people that talked to her were volunteers and other nice people, but they didn't mean anything to her, and they should not have. There is no connection. I know it sounds weird, but medicine had no place for her. If she got sick, then she went to the hospital. She didn't want to go there, and that should be a personal choice. Just a weird conversation at a time in my life when I was inexperienced. I wish I would have had things to say. Now things are changing, and people are accepting more of a personal choice to not participate in forced medicine. There is a lot of political and healthcare things involved, but just eye-opening to hear a competent, sane person say they don't want to do this anymore. Healthcare is really messed up. Hopefully we will begin to listen more and be less authoritarians. I work in a sleep lab, so not even with patients that are terminal, and I've had a few tell me they were ready to die. I hope we've legalized euthanasia by the time I get old. I don't hear many last words. This is probably a better question for nurses, as they really spend the time at the bedside and send us messages like Mr. So-and-so has expired. In general, people who are actively dying in the hospital tend to be fairly delirious at the very end and have received a lot of opioids to relieve the air hunger associated with dying. I haven't heard them speak, really. Not a doctor, but I thought I would share a story about my grandmother. Newmore had been pretty much out of it for 3 weeks with no communication. She was 83. The hospital had placed an apparatus in her throat to keep it from closing up. Her 5 years estranged daughter had come to say goodbye and decided to stay the night with me at my grandmother's bedside. During the night, my grandmother became alert and started trying to talk, but couldn't because of that thing in her throat. Late in the night, we finally convinced the nurse to get permission to pull it out. My grandmother and her daughter spoke for about 3 hours and in their way made peace. Pneumo then went back to sleep and died the next morning. It was a beautiful thing. That was 20 years ago. Years ago, a Redditor wrote that his grandfather had been a pilot in World War II. His grandfather's last words were, "Looks like a good night to fly." It's poignant that I know and remember the last words of the grandfather of a stranger, all because of Reddit. Not a doctor, but I was present for my aunt's euthanasia injections. 5 minutes before her injections, she was still being her inquisitive get to the bottom of this self. He's explaining about the process and the different injections that he'll be doing. I forgot the exact details, but he skips explaining a syringe. I think it is either the second or the last one. She was all like, wait doc, but what about this syringe? When do you inject it? And what does it do? Her intonation and the exact words involved made it a very entertaining, hearty laugh for all present. And even though I forgot the exact details at this point, I still remember it fondly, and not exactly on topic but still something I want to share. People might think death is a scary thing, and it definitely is emotional, but I honestly believe that euthanasia is where a sad fact gets turned into a festivity. Assuming a person wants it, that is likely the most respectful way for a life to end. No more suffering for the person in question. A chance to say a proper goodbye. You can hold their hand, and they can hold yours, and years later, you will still wonder if they were holding your hand to make it easy on you, or if you were holding their hand to make it easier on them. Life is wonderful, but death can be wonderful, too. I appreciate your honesty and attitude towards this. Obligatory: not a doctor, I'm a nurse. Others are right in that men are so ill those last hours that they often don't have any last words, or at least any sensible ones. The ones that stick out. I'm just trying to stay alive post-operative patient after I told him to try and slow his breathing down. He died about 20 minutes after that. I'm going to pass out, similar situation as above. Get out of here. I don't want you in here anymore. Paraphrasing, as memory is foggy on that one. Was a really sick lady with dementia who was rather mean to me those last few hours of my shift. Was lethargic when I left and became unresponsive on the day shift and passed. Last words aren't a huge deal for me, honestly. It's comforting enough to just have a dying patient hopped up on enough pain meds that you know you're making their passing comfortable. Talking on the phone with her son. I love you. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Her acute aortic aneurysm dissected after that, and she wasn't fine. Sometimes hearts just explode. My dad and mom lived with us for a number of years, including the last 2 years of his life. He went from being a real pain in the neck to a pretty nice guy at the end. The last words he ever spoke to me were, "Thank you for all you've done." He stopped speaking after that and died a few days later. I am not a doctor either, but I have recently had my grandfather pass, and he dies when he was being read to with one of his favorite poems. In the middle of a passage about moving on in life, he opened his eyes, looked around the room and passed on. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.